It's Minority Mental Health Awareness Month here in July, and Alyssa and I are here to talk about minority mental health. Yeah, so it's good to see you.
Yeah,
Alyssa.
I'm excited to have this conversation with you and explore this topic more.
Yeah, I agree, Alyssa. I think it's a great topic to explore, and we're gonna, really go into some very specifics about it. Not do a broad overview, but go into more specifics around what is it like to be disenfranchised in society? What is it like to not feel accepted? What is it like to feel like the them instead of the us? Correct? And so I have a bit of a story to start us out, and that is, one of our really good family friends we were going to the same school. Our sons were going to the same school for high school, and the boys were starting off at this new high school, and our family friends are of a different ethnicity that's more of a minority population, and we, everything was going well at the school, and then all of a sudden one day, my son's friend, my good friend's son, he was pulled out of the classroom and taken into a separate space and really questioned very intensely about whether or not he was bringing drugs to school. Well, this kid never, ever did drugs. Like, that was not his thing. He was not into that. Like, that was totally opposite of what, he was raised and what he was participating in. But because he did his hair a certain way and he dressed a certain way, he was pulled into this this principal's room and really interrogated. And I just remember talking to my friend, the mother, afterward, and she was visibly just shaking, so upset, so frustrated, so angry, just really feeling like her son had been profiled because of his ethnicity. And it was hard. It was a hard thing. It was hard to be a part of, but it's hard to watch. It was really hard for her, really hard for the young man. But it really caused me to think even deeper, about what is it like to be a minority in any population, right? And what is it like in terms of being profiled or being set apart and having culture lack empathy and make judgments about you based on something that you were just born into? Was it anything that you did? It was just, your skin color, or, what happened, a birth defect or disorder or something like that. Like, these are things that, we have no choice in, yet we are judged and shamed because of that.
Yeah, what a powerful story. And I'm sure so many people have stories like that, Monica, right? Where there's something about us that causes others to treat us with rejection, which can be so painful, right? When you feel like you are being criticized for something about you that you have no control over, there's a lack of empathy, a lack of acceptance, when really we are wired for connection with people. And so I think in some ways it creates some attachment pain. I think it can be traumatizing, right?
It's so true. And what are we talking about here, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about, are we accepted or are we rejected? And that word, rejection, I find, is a very profound word. And all of us know what it feels like. We are looking for acceptance. We want to have a community where we belong, where we feel some camaraderie. We feel this tribal community sense of belonging and connection. We're all looking for that. And the opposite of that is rejection. And what is rejection? What does it mean to be rejected by community? What do you think? What does it mean to you, that concept?
Yeah, I mean, when I first think about it, Monica, and I think about, what's the opposite of acceptance, it's not just rejection. I think it's this idea of conditional love or having conditions around
Hmm.
how we are treating people.
Yes.
And so it's not always just an outright rejection, but when we look at something like acceptance, I think that it's this idea of loving someone
Yeah.
without trying to edit who they are.
Yes. So good. And I think the point of us having this conversation today is hopefully there's people listening that will think that will feel validated, right? That
Mm.
there's so often there is just more disconnect that's happening. The more we talk about this feeling of being disenfranchised and disconnected and mistreated and rejected, the more disenfranchised we feel a lot of times because it's like people can't handle the conversation. The conversation is
Yes.
too hard to have. And so it leads to even more feelings of isolation and disconnect. And I think our heart is, can we validate that this is a feeling we all have? And some of us more than others because of certain aspects of our being, right? So I'm just thinking about like what happens when we reject others. We're criticizing them or controlling them. We're viewing the differences as imperfections or flaws, which when
Mhm.
we really think about it, that's ridiculous. What is that?
Yeah.
Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And then there's this idea of because we view the differences as imperfections, we withhold affection or lack empathy. We don't connect person to person like human to human. And so there's this emotional disconnection that happens because of differences. Do you remember,
Mhm.
like, I think I learned about this either in grad school or even in high school, probably a psychology class or something, where there was some study, I think in the 50s, the 1950s, in regard to a classroom full of kids, and some of them had blue eyes and some of them had brown eyes. And they, in the experiment, they said to the kids, okay, the people with brown eyes are less important than the people with blue eyes.
Mm.
And so all
Mm.
the kids started kind of playing to that, recognizing that, you know what, there are differences in each of us. Each one of us as a created being is different than the other person. So there are always going to be these things that can create that feeling of disconnect. And I think what we have to figure out is, what are we going to do about that? Like what's the way that we can show up human to human to actually cultivate acceptance rather than continue to reject people?
Right. And I think, Monica, what comes to mind is if we're looking at acceptance from this lens of, I'm not trying to edit who you are, I am honoring who God made you to be and the differences that we have, that even in the way that we think, in the way that we believe, that we can have understanding even when we disagree. We can have compassion towards one another in our differences or even in conflict, and really respecting and honoring who people are in their differences as well as our similarities. I think what comes to mind for me is, if we really take, I mean, it's easy, I think, to look at this through the lens of, has this probably happened to all of us in many different ways? Yes. And does it happen to some people more than others when we're looking at minority populations? Absolutely. Um, but when we take a hard look in the mirror, why do we as humans tend to lean more towards rejecting differences instead of accepting people? Why
Yeah.
is this so hardwired within us that, I'm sure, if I looked at myself, I've had times where it's easier for me to accept people that are similar to me than people that are different. And so, why do we do that?
Yes. So it's such a good question. I think, I mean, the blatant answer is that we are imperfect humans. We're, like Life Model says, we're hardwired toward more of a predatory response, and we
Mm.
learn to be. We actualize into people who are more protectors of community. And I love that concept that we learn in grad school that's really helping us to think that way, that conversation around unconditional positive regard, right? That we are
Mhm.
trained as psychotherapists to join clients with unconditional positive regard. And I don't know about you, but I remember in my early years of therapy having to really check myself internally, like, what am I thinking inside versus how am I showing up on the outside? And I want those two things to be congruent. I want to feel love in my heart. And now we know even the science around right brain psychotherapy says that's super important in terms of
Yeah.
helping people with change, right? But I want to be able to offer that unconditional positive regard and love someone who is different. Even someone who would who's made decisions completely different of my moral value system, because they're human, because everyone deserves love. Doesn't mean there's not boundaries involved.
Mm.
That's kind of what unconditional positive regard is, right? It's that sense
Yeah.
of loving despite differences.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so good. Yeah. And I think that it's challenging, right? I think it causes us to really look inward and try to, just like what you're saying, how do I be wholly integrated where what is being conveyed on the outside actually matches what I'm thinking about this person on the inside? Because people pick up on that and it makes a difference. And I think what can get conveyed when we're not really doing the work on ourselves of, am I truly accepting this person fully as they are, differences, similarities, everything, right? Um, if I'm doing the work, then I have more of a, this is a we mentality. I'm with you, right? Which has huge impacts on our attachment, right? Our
Yeah.
ability to heal.
Yes.
Um, versus when I'm not checking those biases and judgments and
Mm-hmm.
thoughts, it can come across as it's a you versus me, right? An us versus them
Right.
mentality,
Right.
which can be damaging. And people, whether we speak it or not, our nonverbal communication really goes a long way. People pick up on that stuff.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. I'm actually a few years ago I took one of Dan Siegel's courses, and I know we all as therapists love him and love what he's doing with interpersonal neurobiology, but I took like a long course, like a 6 month
Mm,
um, committed course where he was coming on every other month and answering questions, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember in listening to this on demand training at one point, he started talking about this us and them mentality and how us versus them is actually hardwired into, it's a survival based function of how we as humans do life. And there's some good in that, right? Because if we're in this tribal or community setting and we need to protect our tribe, we go into an us and them mentality to be protective. But what we're thinking about as psychotherapists and as people who want to better society is that we've got to be more integrated rather than segregated in terms of how we function if we're going to be actualized humans who really do care. And that's what you're talking about with the we brain. How
mhm.
can we go from an us and them to a we brain? That's a more actualized brain, even with people who aren't like us.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And, when we look at us versus them mentality, it makes sense why it's there to protect us. But this is where our brains are designed in such a complex way that we can override that protective system, kick us out of survival mode. Because when we stay stuck in us versus them mentality, it's actually so divisive, right? This is what starts drawing lines in the sand and dividing cultures and people groups and in the world. So yeah, being able to look at integration versus segregation. Integration is not just a therapy concept. This is truly how our brains start to heal and cultures and societies start to flourish, is when we start learning how to integrate and work
Yeah.
alongside, get to know and understand people who are different from us.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, like the science behind it, right, is that the amygdala is hijacked in that fight or flight mentality. We're going to go into us and then, or life model calls enemy mode. But when we override that automatic fear-based function and actualize into people who love and love well, even those who are very different, even those who act in ways we would never act or we don't think is appropriate to act, we end up kind of seeing the world through this bigger lens of, like you were saying, a more integrated conceptualization, a more integrated approach. And I think that gets really tricky when we think about people who are actually doing violent acts, right? That we're like, well, how could I ever appreciate or be an us with someone who's doing something that is evil, that's terrible? This is something I've actually thought about, and you might have something to say about it. But the way I think of it, Alyssa, is if we have empathy for all humankind, we can get an us mentality with them. It does not mean we agree or condone or think what they're doing is right, but we have empathy that the reason this person is doing this is because of something they didn't get, because of
Yeah.
pain and woundedness in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, Monica, I think what comes to mind as you say that is one, I love that idea of how do we empathize even with the people that are the hardest for us to understand, that we are so far from agreeing with, or that we don't condone their actions, like you're saying. And what comes to mind is that, you know, several verses that Jesus tells us to love our enemies. Well, I think oftentimes when we first think about, do I have enemies? A lot of times I would say our answer is no, but truly when we think about it from this lens of acceptance versus rejection, and do we have people that we often say, I don't like those people, or I don't have anything in common with them. I don't agree with what they're doing. That's who Jesus is calling us to love, to grow empathy towards, to be able to really, I think what you're saying is be able to see these people through the eyes of heaven. If we had God's perception of what this person has been through, what they didn't get, the experiences that they've had, would we have more empathy and love towards them?
So good, Alyssa. That's exactly the way I think of it too. And I think that that opens the door to a huge conversation, a much larger conversation that we don't have time to delve into today. I think about just to close this first part today. We do have a second and a third coming up, and where we're going to delve deeper and talk more to therapists and talk more to applying the life model of these concepts. I'm just thinking about our goal. Our goal is acceptance. Our goal is actualizing into our fullest potential as humans, to become our true selves and live out God's love in the world and have true empathy and connection with others, even those who are not like us, learning to live in peace and harmony and joy with everyone around us. That's our goal, right?
Yeah, so good. And I'm excited to continue to unpack this topic with you. This has been so fun, and there's like so much more to explore with this.
Yes. Okay. We'll talk again soon then.